I woke Tyler up one Saturday morning and said, "Get up. We're getting married today." Not because I loved him madly in that moment, but because I was so afraid of dying alone that I'd rather chain myself to the person who was slowly killing me. My name is Rachel Bennett. I'm 35 years old. I've been a wheelchair user since I was 13, mother of 2 children, and this is the story of how I let a man turn me into a shadow for years while I thought I was saving him. I was born and raised in Astoria, Queens, that kind of working-class neighborhood in New York, where everyone knows everyone, where mothers yell out windows calling their kids for dinner, where you grow up playing ball in the street and buying candy at the corner bodega. My mom always worked double shifts as a nursing assistant, waking up at 3 a.m. to leave lunch ready, clothes washed and ironed before leaving. I watched her leave in the dark, exhausted but never complaining, and that to me was always the meaning of strength. My dad was a construction worker, calloused hands, a man of few words but always present in the moments that mattered. We didn't have much, but we had enough, and I grew up thinking that simple, honest, hard-working life was all I needed to be happy. I was always that energetic girl, full of ideas, creating fashion trends among my school friends, teaching them to tie a knot in their uniform shirt to look more stylish before getting on the school bus. We'd take them off on the way, feeling like the coolest kids around, and put them back on before getting to school so nobody would find out. I had friends everywhere, lived on the street playing with neighbors, and despite the normal childhood fights, I always had this strange feeling that one day my life would be different, that I wasn't going to spend my whole life in that same place. I can't explain it exactly. It was an intuition, a premonition that followed me since I was little, as if God was preparing me for something big. I just didn't know yet if it would be big in a good way or in a devastating way. My family was always Christian, Baptist church every Sunday, and that faith was the center of everything in our house. I grew up believing that God had a plan, that everything happened for a reason, and that if we stayed firm in faith, nothing bad could really destroy us. That belief was tested in a way I never imagined possible. On February 28, 2007, I was 13 years old, and I ditched school in the morning because a girl had borrowed my notebook and didn't return it. My cousin and I waited in the plaza to catch her on her way out. Silly teenager stuff, but it made me get home late. My mom was furious because I had a dentist appointment scheduled in Manhattan on Madison Avenue, a rare opportunity we got with a discount because it was a teaching clinic. I needed to fix a huge gap between my front teeth, and that treatment was way too expensive for our family to pay without help. I took the subway alone, something I did sometimes, feeling independent and grown up, not imagining that would be the last day I'd step on the ground with my own legs. The appointment was quick, different from all the other times, and I thought it was strange for them to see me so fast, but I was happy to be able to leave soon. I left the clinic, walked to the bus stop on the avenue, and that's when I heard the first shots. There was a robbery happening at a bank nearby. Rifles, screams, people running in panic, cars stopping, that total chaos you see in movies but never imagine you'll live through. I threw myself on the ground, survival instinct, but when I tried to drag myself to protect myself behind a car, I realized my legs weren't responding anymore. I looked to the side and saw the pool of blood spreading fast on the hot asphalt beneath me. In that split second, at 13 years old, I understood that my life had just changed forever, that the Rachel who entered that dental clinic was no longer the same one lying there bleeding on the sidewalk. I managed to grab my cell phone and call my mom, my voice coming out kind of choked, saying I'd been shot. But before she could say anything, someone ripped the phone from my hand and ran away with it. There I was, alone, 13 years old, unable to move my legs, without a phone, in the middle of an active shootout, and the only thing I could do was repeat in a low voice, "Lord, I'm in your hands. Don't let me die here." I don't know how long it took for the police to arrive, but it felt like an eternity. A police officer crouched beside me, talking to me the whole time, while the shots still echoed around, and at some point, I told him I was feeling blood rising in my throat. That's when he shouted that he needed to get me out of there urgently, that I was having internal bleeding. They picked me up, literally, put me inside the patrol car, and we went down 4 blocks in the wrong direction, because no ambulance could get close to the shootout area. I remember another officer holding me against his chest, looking firmly into my eyes and saying with a frightening conviction, "I'm not going to let you die. You're not going to die." And I, for some reason, believed him, leaned against his chest and smiled, as if that were a guarantee that everything would be okay. We arrived at Mount Sinai Hospital. They threw me on a stretcher, doctors running from everywhere, machines beeping, people shouting medical orders I didn't understand. And there I was, talking to everyone, telling them I'd ditched school, that I'd eaten at lunch, trying to maintain normalcy while they cut my clothes to see where the bullet had entered. A doctor grabbed scissors to cut my bra, and I, even in that state, had the courage to say, "Doctor, this bra is new. My mom hasn't even paid for it yet. Can't you just take it off without cutting it?" She looked at me in disbelief and said, "Rachel, you're worried about the bra right now?" And I, with all the seriousness in the world, replied, "Of course my mom's going to kill me if she finds out I ruined it." We laughed. That nervous laugh of someone who doesn't know if they'll survive but needs to find some way not to go into complete panic. The last thing I remember before blacking out was my older brother arriving running, looking at me lying on that stretcher full of blood with an expression of total shock, as if he couldn't process that it was me there. He touched my hand trembling, and I still had the strength to say something before everything went black. I woke up 2 days later, on a Saturday night, with a bunch of people around my bed, press wanting interviews, family crying, and a team of doctors entering the room to give me the news I already knew from the moment I looked at the ground and saw my legs immobile in the pool of blood. The doctor cleared his throat and started that careful speech doctors make when they're going to give bad news, and I simply cut him off in the middle and said, "Doctor, you took all this time to tell me I'm paraplegic, but I've known that since Wednesday." He stood there looking at me, not knowing what to say, and then asked if I was okay, if I understood what that meant. I looked at him and said with a calm, "I don't even know where it came from. Doctor, they tried to take everything from me, but they didn't take my head, and it's working just fine. From here on out, we don't look back." And then I said the phrase that became my life motto. For those who have faith, life never ends. Religion was always my safe harbor, and even there, at 13 years old, paralyzed from the chest down, I had an unshakable certainty that God hadn't let me survive that bullet to see me give up on life now. I didn't know yet, but I would need that faith much more than I imagined, not because of the wheelchair, but because of the choices I would make in the coming years. Rehabilitation was long, months in the hospital, learning to live in a body that no longer responded like before, but I never let the chair define me as a person. I'd disappear from my mom at the rehab center to go talk to the boys. I'd hang out in apartments when I should be in physical therapy, and my mom would get desperate saying that wasn't right, that I needed to take it seriously. But I did take it seriously, just in my own way, because I'd understood one thing very early. The wheelchair would be part of my life, but it wasn't going to be the limit of my life. I was still Rachel, still liked people, going out, living, and I wasn't going to let 2 wheels change who I was inside. I went back to public school in Queens already with the chair, and I confess I was insecure at first, afraid of how people would react, of being treated differently, of being excluded. But the exact opposite happened. The boys at school embraced me in a way I'll never forget. They carried my chair step by step when the theater didn't have a ramp. They included me in everything, and they even gave me a nickname because I tied my hair with so much gel it was hard as a helmet. Those boys, many married today and still my friends, showed me that I could have 2 versions of my life, Rachel before the bullet and Rachel after the bullet, and that both could be complete and happy, each in their own way. I started dating early, because the chair was never an obstacle to anything. I went to parties, danced, made out with boys, and always made it clear, this doesn't limit me at all, so don't treat me like it does. I met my first serious boyfriend, Darius, through a mutual friend, and he'd just gotten out of gang life, was trying to straighten himself out. He'd never met anyone like me, someone who'd survived a bullet and still lived with such intensity, and that touched him in a profound way. We started dating, and during the time we were together, he changed completely, left the streets, refused initiation, and all because he looked at me in the chair, and I said, "You have no idea what the weight is of losing your freedom in a way you can't control. Don't throw your life away." He listened to me, and for a while, it seemed like we were going to build something real. But Darius never had responsibility with work, was never truly committed, and when I found out I was pregnant at 16, I thought that would be the push he needed to finally grow up. I was sure I couldn't get pregnant, So when the test came back positive, it was a shock, but also the answer to a prayer I'd made weeks before. I remember being on the bus, looking out the window and whispering to God, "Lord, I feel like I'm fading away, and I need something that makes me want to truly live." 3 weeks later, I was pregnant. My family was in shock, but for me that wasn't the end of the world. It was the beginning of a new world. My son Liam was born healthy, without any complications, and that was the proof I needed that God was still in control. But Darius never really took on the role of father, and when Liam fell off the couch in the dark because he didn't pay the electric bill, I understood I needed to protect my child. I broke up with him, and at 18 I became a single mom for real. It was in that context, single mom, working, living, that I met Tyler. He showed up at my birthday party, and when he said he was alone, no family, no one, that he'd been abandoned and thought he could make me happy, those words got me in a way I didn't expect. 3 months later, he was already living with me, with a bag of old clothes, and he didn't even have a social security card. My mom took one look at him and said, "Can't you see a bum on the street without wanting to bring him into your house? Isn't what you went through enough?" I fought back, defended him, said it was different, that he was going to make me happy. And that's how the hell began, that I, naively thought would be my fairy tale. Tyler arrived at my house with a grocery bag full of old clothes, a driver's license expired years ago, and no social security card. He had nothing that proved who he really was. No history, no credit, nothing. His story was heartbreaking. His mother had distributed the children among relatives when she met a new man who didn't accept children from another relationship. And Tyler had stayed with some uncles who treated him like cheap labor, forcing him to work as a construction helper since he was a teenager, or he'd be thrown out on the street. When he told me this, with that low voice and eyes full of hurt, I felt an almost maternal need to protect him, to give him everything life had denied him. I looked at that man and saw a project, saw wasted potential, saw someone who just needed a real chance to show what he was capable of. So I decided I would be that chance, that I would transform him, build him from scratch, and when he became big and strong, we'd be side by side, a real couple, built on love and overcoming. My God, how wrong I was. The first months were intense. That way new relationships always are, when everything seems perfect because you still don't know the deeper layers of the person. We'd talk until late, make plans for the future, and I felt complete in a way I hadn't since before the bullet. Tyler was affectionate with me, helped with Liam, and seemed genuinely grateful to have a place to call home. But there was something I started to notice. Small at first, almost imperceptible. He didn't like it when I went out with my friends. Nothing aggressive, nothing obvious, just a comment here and there like, "You're going out again? We barely spent time together this week." Or, "Okay, go, but don't be long, right?" I get worried. At first I thought it was cute, thought it was the protective kind of jealousy, a sign that he cared. But gradually that became more frequent, more insistent, and I started to feel a subtle pressure, as if I had to ask permission to live my own life. The first real fight we had was about my adapted car. I'd received that car as a donation after the accident. It was adapted especially for me, with all the manual controls I needed to drive being a wheelchair user. That car was my independence, my freedom, proof that I didn't need to depend on anyone to come and go. But Tyler started using the car more than I did. Always had an excuse. I need to go to a job interview. Or, I'm going to sort out some documents. Or, I'll just go there real quick and come right back. At first I let him, because I wanted to support him, wanted him to have the tools necessary to grow. But then I realized that out of 7 days a week, I used the car one day, and he used it 6. When I questioned it, he got defensive, said I was being selfish, that he was trying to improve his life, and I was putting obstacles. And there began a pattern that would repeat for the next years. Me feeling guilty for setting boundaries in my own life. My family hated Tyler from day one, and that created a tension in the house that was impossible to ignore. My mom didn't hide her disapproval, made acid comments, refused to eat at the same table as him, and made it clear she thought I was making the biggest mistake of my life. My dad, who was a man of few words, pulled Tyler aside one day and said, "You come from a troubled family, and until your family finishes destroying my daughter, you're not going to have peace. You're going to make her pay a very high price." At the time I thought that was an exaggeration, prejudice against his background. But my dad knew people from Tyler's family from other contexts, knew things I didn't know, and was trying to protect me in his way. My brother was even more direct, said to my face that I was surrounded by guys with real potential, guys who could help me grow, pay for college, give me stability, and I chose precisely the only one who didn't even have documents. The fights at home were daily, screaming, doors slamming, and me always in the middle defending Tyler, as if defending him was defending my own choice, my own dignity. I started investing heavily in him, financially and emotionally. I paid for the first professional course, then the second, then the third, and in the end, I'd invested over $12,000 in courses and certifications for him. I accompanied him to all job interviews, stayed outside the companies waiting, sometimes in the rain, sometimes under scorching sun, sitting in my chair as if I were invisible, just to give moral support. When he finally got his first registered job, I celebrated as if it were my victory, because in my head that's exactly what it was. I was building him, molding him, and when he was ready, we'd reap the fruits together. I took him to stores, bought new clothes, underwear, socks, shoes, all the best quality, because I didn't want him to feel inferior to anyone. I borrowed money from my family, who complained but never refused, and used my entire salary and even a payroll loan from work to finance his transformation. There was a day that marked a turning point, but I didn't realize it at the time. Tyler was doing some odd jobs with an uncle of his, working in construction while waiting for the permanent job to come through, and he called me desperate, saying that an electric saw had slipped and cut his leg. When he got home and showed me, I saw the exposed flesh, that deep cut that reached the bone, and the uncle had told him to put gauze on it and go back to work. I lost it, called the uncle, and screamed at him on the phone in a way I'd never screamed at anyone, called an Uber right away because we didn't have a car at that time, and took Tyler to the emergency room. I stayed by his side during the whole treatment, talking to the doctors, explaining what had happened, being his voice when he was too shocked to speak. It took several stitches, bandaging, pain medication, and I was there like a lioness protecting her cub. When we got back home, I said, "That's it. You're not working with that family anymore." That's when I had an idea I thought was brilliant at the time, but actually was one more step into sinking deeper. Tyler hadn't spoken to his mother in years, since she'd distributed the children and disappeared from their lives. I grabbed his cell phone, found her number in the old contacts, and started sending messages pretending to be him. I wrote about how he was doing well, had a place to live, was trying to rebuild his life, and she responded thinking it was really him. I set up a meeting, gave our address, and when she showed up with a box of chocolates, Tyler was sitting on the couch not knowing anything. He turned white when he saw her at the door, froze there not knowing how to react, and she came in as if nothing had happened, hugged him and said, "Your uncles told me you'd met a wheelchair woman and left with her, but nobody had your address." I smiled and said, "Yeah, nice to meet you. The wheelchair woman is me. Make yourself at home. The house is yours too." She looked at the whole house, every corner, and I noticed that evaluative, calculating look, as if she were estimating how much each thing was worth. Other aunts came later, all with that same look, and one of them even said, "He's living in this house? In this house here?" As if it were absurd that someone like him could have access to a minimally decent life. I didn't understand at the time, but I was creating a bridge between Tyler and a family that would only bring destruction to my life. I thought I was helping him reconnect with his roots, heal old wounds, but actually I was opening the door for hell to come in. Tyler started spending more time with his mother and aunts, and whenever he came back from those visits, he came different, more distant, more irritated. I'd ask if everything was okay and he'd deflect, say yes, that it was just tiredness, but I felt something was wrong. The fights became more frequent. He started comparing me to his family, saying things like, "My mom said you control me too much," or, "My aunts think you don't let me be a real man." I was confused, because I thought I was doing exactly the opposite. I was giving freedom, giving support, giving everything he needed to grow. Things started deteriorating slowly, so slowly that I couldn't identify when exactly it had started going wrong. Tyler stayed late at work, always with reasonable excuses, and when he got home he was too exhausted to talk, too exhausted to help me with Liam, too exhausted for anything. I started feeling alone even being in a relationship, as if I'd gone back to being a single mom, but now with the extra weight of taking care of an adult man too. My mom noticed, made comments, but I fought back with anger because admitting she was right about Tyler from the beginning was admitting I'd wasted years of my life, money, energy, everything on a losing bet. So I kept investing, kept believing, kept pretending everything was okay when clearly it wasn't. There was a night I'll never forget. One of those nights when you know something changed but can't quite put your finger on what. We were lying in bed, Tyler and I, and he'd been on his phone for hours, smiling at the screen, typing fast, completely absorbed. I asked who he was talking to, and he locked the screen immediately, said it was nobody, just some friends from work. But the way he hid the phone, that instinctive and defensive movement, lit a red light in my head that I tried to turn off immediately. I didn't want to be that paranoid girlfriend, the one who monitors phones, the one who suspects everything. So I swallowed the bad feeling and turned to the other side to sleep. But my body wouldn't relax. My heart was beating fast, and a voice in the back of my head was screaming that something was very, very wrong. The months went by, and Tyler became increasingly absent emotionally, even when he was physically present. He developed this habit of giving me a kiss on the forehead before leaving, every time, without fail, as if it were a ritual. At first I thought it was affectionate, but over time that kiss transformed into something sinister, because it always came followed by, "I'll be back later," and that later could mean 2 hours or 6 hours, you could never tell. I started associating that forehead kiss with abandonment, with loneliness, and it got to a point that when he approached to kiss me that way, my stomach would churn with anxiety. But I never said anything, never complained, because I was afraid of seeming needy, of seeming controlling, of being everything his family said I was. Tyler started getting more aggressive with words. Never anything physical at that time, but words were like knives. They cut deep and left invisible marks that no one else saw but that I felt every day. He'd say I was lucky he was with me, because what other man would want a woman in a wheelchair? He'd say I should be grateful he hadn't abandoned me like Liam's father did, as if he were doing me a huge favor just by being there. And the worst part is, I started believing that, started thinking he was right, that I really didn't deserve anything better, that I should accept crumbs of affection and be thankful for them. My self-esteem, which had been so strong after the accident, which had sustained me through everything, started crumbling, brick by brick, poisonous word by poisonous word. There was a day Tyler came home smelling different, a sweet perfume that definitely wasn't what he'd put on in the morning. I commented, trying to sound casual, and he laughed in my face and said, "You're imagining things. You're getting paranoid, Rachel. This isn't healthy." And then he flipped the script, started saying I needed psychological help, that I was seeing things that didn't exist, that my insecurity was destroying the relationship. That left me so confused that I really started doubting myself, started thinking maybe I really was going crazy, that maybe the wheelchair, motherhood, work, everything together was leaving me unbalanced. So I apologized for mistrusting him, for questioning him, and promised I'd try to be better, less insecure, more confident. And he accepted my apologies with that little smile that now I know was a victory, because he'd gotten exactly what he wanted, to make me doubt my own perception of reality. I stared at that notification on his phone screen like I was watching a car accident in slow motion, that moment when you know something terrible is happening but your brain refuses to process it. The name was Jess, with a pink heart, and the preview message said, "Can't wait to see you today." My hands started shaking, my heart raced, and I felt that wave of heat rising from my chest to my head, that feeling that the ground was disappearing beneath me. I knew I should grab the phone, open it, read everything, confront him right then, but my body simply froze. The sound of the shower was still on. I had time, but it was like my arms weighed 1,000 pounds and couldn't move. When I heard the water stop, I pulled the chair away from the table in an abrupt movement and pretended I was making coffee. My hands shaking so much I spilled the grounds on the floor. Tyler came out of the bathroom with a towel around his waist, grabbed the phone without even looking at me, and went to the bedroom to get dressed. In that moment, I understood I'd lost my only chance to confirm what I already knew deep down. He was cheating on me. The following days were a psychological torture I can't fully describe. I started paying attention to every detail, every movement of his, every time he grabbed his phone and left the room to answer, every time he took more than 20 minutes in the bathroom with the phone in his hand. I became a detective in my own house. And the more I observed, the more signs I saw. He started taking better care of his appearance, started using that hair gel I'd never seen before, bought new clothes without telling me, and whenever I asked where that shirt or those pants came from, he'd say it was a gift from a coworker. What coworker gives clothes as gifts? But I swallowed that lie because the alternative was admitting the truth, and I still wasn't ready. I still wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation, that I was paranoid like he said, that my insecurity was creating problems where they didn't exist. But my body knew the truth, even when my mind refused to accept it. I started having insomnia, stayed awake until 3, 4 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, listening to Tyler breathe beside me, and wondering if he was dreaming about her. I started losing weight without noticing. My clothes got loose. My mom commented I looked sick, but I always had an excuse. I was tired from work. Liam wasn't sleeping well. It was just some bad days that would pass soon. The truth is, I was dying inside, cell by cell, and each of his lies was another stab. There was a night I woke up, and he wasn't in bed. I searched the whole house and found him on the balcony, in the dark, whispering on the phone. When he saw me, he hung up immediately and said it was his brother, that he was having problems, and had called late. I didn't believe it for a second, but what was I going to do? Accuse him without proof? Start a fight in the middle of the night? So I did what every desperate woman does when she can't stand living in uncertainty anymore. I decided to look for concrete proof. I waited for him to leave for work, grabbed his old laptop that was stored in the closet, and tried to open it. It had a password. I tried all the obvious combinations. His birthday, my birthday, Liam's birthday, our dating anniversary. Nothing worked. But then I remembered Tyler had the habit of writing down passwords in a little notebook he kept in the nightstand drawer. Those confusing notes he said were so he wouldn't forget the bank and online account passwords. I opened the drawer, found the little notebook, and there it was, his email password. My hands were shaking so much I got it wrong 3 times before I could type it right. But when I finally opened it, what I saw destroyed me in a way that not even the bullet at 13 had managed to destroy me. There were emails, dozens of emails between him and a woman named Jessica. And they weren't friendship emails. They were emails of a complete parallel relationship. I read everything, every word, every declaration of love from him to her. Every time he said he was going to leave the situation with me to be able to be with her for real. Every promise he made while sleeping beside me every night. There were photos of the two of them together in places I recognized, places where he'd said he was working or sorting things out with family. There were messages from her complaining that he spent too much time with me, and him responding that it was complicated, that he needed time to organize things, that I depended on him financially and emotionally, and he couldn't just abandon me. Reading that was like being shot again, but this time the bullet didn't hit my spine. It hit straight in the heart. I closed the laptop, put everything back exactly as it was, and sat in the living room waiting for him to come back. When Tyler got home that night, I was calm. Strangely calm. That calm that comes after you've already cried everything you had to cry alone for hours. I looked at him and asked directly, "Who's Jessica?" His face changed immediately. That panic he tried to disguise too quickly, and he said, "Who?" as if he hadn't heard right. "Jessica," I repeated. "The woman you've been having a relationship with for over a year while sleeping in my bed every day." I expected him to confess, that at least he'd have the decency to admit it now that I knew. But Tyler did what every manipulator does when cornered. He attacked. He started yelling at me, saying I'd invaded his privacy, that I had no right to go through his things, that I was crazy, controlling, that this proved I needed psychiatric help. He flipped the table so efficiently that suddenly I was on the defensive, feeling guilty for discovering he was cheating on me, as if the problem was me looking and not him lying. And that worked, at least partially, because a part of me started doubting if I'd done the right thing. The fight lasted hours, him denying, minimizing, saying Jessica was just a friend from work, that the emails were misinterpreted, that I was seeing things that didn't exist because I was insecure. He said it was my fault, that I'd let myself go, that I didn't take care of myself anymore, that I only thought about Liam and work, and never had time for him. Each accusation was a new knife, and I started believing each one, started internalizing that maybe he was right, that maybe I'd pushed him into another person's arms for not being good enough, At the end of that night, incredibly, I was apologizing. Apologizing for invading his privacy, for being insecure, for not being the partner he deserved, and he accepted my apologies, hugged me, and said we were going to get through that he was going to distance himself from Jessica, that he was going to focus on us. I believed him because I needed to believe, because the alternative was accepting that the last years of my life had been a complete lie. But things didn't get better. They just got worse in a more subtle way. Tyler became more careful, changed all his passwords, started deleting messages immediately, but the signs continued. He started going out more, always with elaborate excuses, and always came back late. Once he said his mother was sick, and he needed to stay taking care of her. But when I called her worried, I found out he hadn't even shown up there. When I confronted him, he exploded, said I was controlling him, invading his space, that I was the reason he needed to escape. And the sickest part is, I apologized. Once again, I apologized for wanting to know where my partner was spending his days. My sense of reality was so distorted that I really believed it was wrong to expect my boyfriend to tell me his whereabouts. I started taking anxiety medication that a friend gave me, without a prescription, just to be able to sleep at night without having panic attacks. I'd take 3-4 pills at once, anything to turn off my brain and not have to think about the mess my life had become. There was a morning I woke up and couldn't get out of bed, literally couldn't. It wasn't a matter of not wanting to, it was that my body simply didn't respond to my brain's commands. I lay there staring at the ceiling, and for the first time since the shooting at 13, I wished I hadn't survived. I thought, why did God save me from that bullet if it was for me to end up like this, destroyed inside, dead while alive? Liam came into the room to say goodbye before school. My mom had come to pick him up because I wasn't able to fulfill even the basic tasks of being a mother anymore, and he looked at me with those worried eyes of a child who knows something is very wrong but doesn't understand what. He asked, "Mommy, are you sick?" And I lied, said yes, that it was just a bad flu, that soon I'd be better. But the truth is I was sick, yes, sick with a disease that had no medicine at the pharmacy, sick from having let someone suck all my essence until nothing was left. Tyler's family started showing up more at my house, and that added another layer of humiliation to my personal hell. His mother would come, look at my house, my belongings, and make comments about how Tyler was being generous with me, about how I was lucky to have someone who took care of me, despite everything. The despite everything, always loaded with that veiled prejudice about my disability, as if I should thank every day that a man had the courage to be with a woman in a wheelchair. His aunts did worse, gave advice on how I should behave to keep Tyler interested. You need to dress up more, wear makeup, do your hair, as if the problem was my appearance and not the fact he was having a complete parallel relationship. And the most shocking of all, his mother knew about Jessica. She knew and approved, even said on one of those visits, "Men are like that, they need variety, but in the end they always come back home, to the safe harbor." She literally advised me to accept the betrayal, to turn a blind eye, because according to her, at least he still sleeps here, hasn't completely abandoned you. In that moment, hearing that woman tell me to accept being cheated on as if it were the normal price of a relationship, something started moving inside me. It wasn't anger yet. It wasn't strength. It was more like a tiny spark of awareness, that little voice that hadn't been completely suffocated yet, saying, "This isn't normal. This isn't love. This is destruction." But that voice was still too weak to get me out of there. So I continued. A few more months of agony. A few more months dragging myself through the days like a zombie. My weight kept dropping. I got down to 85 pounds, almost 60 pounds less than I weighed before meeting Tyler. My bones showed. My skin turned gray. My hair started falling out in clumps. The pastors from church started making visits. Not the normal courtesy visits, but those visits you make when someone is dying and you want to say goodbye. They prayed for me, asked God to give me strength, but even the faith that had always been my anchor was disappearing, because I couldn't understand how a God who loved me had allowed me to get to that state. Tyler saw all of that happening and did nothing. Actually, he seemed satisfied, as if the weaker I got, the easier it was to control me. There was a day I fainted in the kitchen from pure weakness, hit my head on the corner of the table, and when I woke up, He was on top of me, not with concern, but with anger, saying, "You're going to die just to make me feel guilty? This is emotional manipulation. That should have been the last straw. That should have been the moment I kicked him out definitively. But it wasn't." I apologized for fainting, apologized for worrying him, and promised I'd eat more, take better care of myself. And he, satisfied for maintaining control, gave me another one of those forehead kisses, and left, probably straight to her arms, while I stayed there on the kitchen floor, feeling the blood from the cut on my head drip, thinking maybe it would be easier to simply never get up again. My mom's words echoed in my head for days. "You're already dead. You just haven't been buried yet." She was right, and for the first time in months I could see clearly what I'd become. A walking corpse, a shadow without substance, a woman who'd survived a bullet at 13 only to let a man slowly kill me 20 years later. My mom didn't leave my side that night, took me out of the tub, dressed me in dry clothes, and sat on the edge of my bed until the sun rose, as if she were afraid that if she left me alone, I'd disappear completely. And maybe she was right, because at that point I wasn't sure of anything anymore. Not if I wanted to keep living. Not if I had the strength to change anything. But something that night planted a tiny seed of revolt, so small I could barely feel it. But it was there, starting to germinate at the bottom of my destroyed soul. Tyler came back home the next morning, walked in as if nothing had happened, and found my mom in the living room waiting for him. What happened next, I heard from the bedroom, because I didn't have the strength to even get out of bed. My mom, that woman who'd always worked in silence, who'd always taken care of everyone without asking for anything in return, exploded in a way I'd never seen. She yelled at Tyler, said he was a coward, a parasite, that he was killing her daughter, and that if he had an ounce of decency he'd leave before it was too late. Tyler tried to fight back, tried to use that condescending tone he always used with me. But my mom wasn't me. She wasn't broken, wasn't under his control. She said, "You think I don't know you're with someone else? You think no one in this house knows? The difference is Rachel is still so sick that she accepts it, but I'm not going to accept you killing my daughter while I'm still alive." Tyler left slamming the door, and my mom came into the room, sat on my bed, and for the first time in years I let her hug me while I cried. It was in that hug, in that moment of complete surrender, that something started to change. My mom said, "Daughter, I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to be honest with me and with yourself. If Liam grows up and gets involved in a relationship like yours, are you going to think it's okay?" The question hit me like a punch in the stomach. I imagined my son, years in the future, being treated the way Tyler treated me, being humiliated, cheated on, destroyed bit by bit, and the answer was instant and visceral. Never. I would never want that for my son. And then came the second part of the question, the one my mom didn't even need to ask out loud. If I didn't want that for Liam, why was I teaching him that it was acceptable by allowing it to happen to me? In that moment, I understood that staying wasn't protecting my son, it was destroying him too. It was teaching him that love is suffering, that relationships are acceptance of abuse, that women should erase themselves to keep men around. In the following days, something started reorganizing inside me. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't an instant transformation. It was more like a slow and painful awakening, like when you stay in a dark room for too long and someone suddenly turns on the light and your eyes hurt with the brightness. I started paying attention again to small things. The sound of Liam's breathing when he slept, the smell of the coffee my mom made in the morning, the feeling of the sun coming through the window. Basic things I'd stopped noticing because I'd stopped being present in my own life. I started forcing food down my throat, even without hunger, because I understood that if I wanted to have the strength to get out of that situation, I needed to be truly alive, not just existing. My mom cooked small portions throughout the day and stayed by my side until I ate everything, as if I were a child again, learning to feed myself. There was an afternoon that changed everything for good. I was in the living room when I heard Tyler's cell phone ring in the kitchen. He'd forgotten it when he ran out in the morning after the fight with my mom. I looked at that ringing phone, and part of me said to ignore it, not to touch it. But another part, that spark of revolt that was growing, said, "You have the right to know the complete truth." I answered the call. It was Jessica. She was silent for a second when she heard my voice and then said, "You must be Rachel. We need to talk." My heart raced, but I said, "Okay, we can talk." We arranged to meet at a Starbucks near home, neutral territory, and I hung up, shaking from head to toe. I didn't tell anyone I was going to meet her, not even my mom, because I was afraid that if I said it out loud, I'd lose my courage. I got to the cafe half an hour early, asking the transport service driver to drop me off there and come back to pick me up in 2 hours. Jessica arrived on time, and she was exactly like in the photos I'd seen. Pretty, well-dressed, confident. But when she sat in front of me, I saw something in her eyes I didn't expect. Guilt. She started talking. "I didn't know you were a wheelchair user. Tyler never mentioned it. Actually, Tyler lied about a lot of things." And then she told her version of the story. Tyler had told her that we barely spoke, that we lived together only for financial convenience, that he was saving money to leave, but it was complicated because I was dependent on him because of the disability. He'd painted a picture where he was the hero who couldn't abandon the poor woman in a wheelchair, and she, the savior who would finally free him from that prison. Jessica said she only found out the truth when she started asking why he could never spend holidays with her, why he could never travel on weekends, why he always had to come back home. That's when she decided to investigate and discovered that far from being a dead relationship, we were together for real. Or at least I thought we were. Hearing all of that from her mouth was surreal. We stayed 2 hours talking, comparing stories, putting together puzzle pieces, and discovering that Tyler had lied to both sides in elaborate and consistent ways. He'd tell me he needed to work Saturday and Sunday, but actually spent those days with her. He'd tell her I was cold and distant, when actually I was at home taking care of his son that he'd sworn to raise as his own. The expensive Christmas present he'd given me, it was actually hers. He'd bought the wrong size and decided to give it to me. The work trip he took last month, it was vacation with her in Florida. Each revelation was a stab, but strangely, instead of destroying me more, it was giving me clarity. I wasn't crazy like he said. My intuition was right all along. Everything I'd suspected was real, and even worse. At the end of the conversation, Jessica said something that stuck. "I came here thinking I was going to hate you, but actually I just feel sorry for both of us. We were used by the same man in different ways. I came back home that afternoon transformed. Not healed, not strong yet, but different. I had information now, had concrete proof of everything, and more importantly, I'd seen with my own eyes that it wasn't just me, that Tyler was capable of manipulating and lying to everyone with the same ease. When he got home that night, acting like always, kissing my forehead before going to shower, I didn't feel that pain in my stomach anymore. I felt something new, contempt. I looked at him, and for the first time saw not the man I loved, not the project I'd tried to build, but a dangerous stranger who'd infiltrated my life and almost completely destroyed me. I didn't confront him that night, because I knew I needed a plan, needed to be stronger, needed to be sure that when I took the next step, it would be definitive and without return. But something fundamental had changed. I'd stopped believing his lies. I started doing small things that seemed insignificant, but were acts of rebellion. I stopped apologizing for everything. When he complained about the food, I'd say, "Then cook it yourself." When he asked for the car, I'd say, "No, I'm going to need it today." The first time I did that, Tyler was so shocked he didn't even know how to react, because he'd conditioned me for years to never say no, to always give in, to always put his needs before mine. I saw anger pass through his eyes, but he couldn't completely explode because my mom was temporarily living with me, and he knew she wouldn't tolerate it. Gradually, inch by inch, I started recovering pieces of myself. I went back to eating for real, and with each pound I gained back, I felt my strength returning too. It wasn't just physical strength. It was mental. It was emotional. It was spiritual. It was the Rachel who'd survived a bullet starting to fight again. I sought professional help, something I should have done months ago. I started therapy with a psychologist specialized in abusive relationships, and in the first sessions all she did was listen to me. I'd tell the stories thinking that in the end she'd say it was my fault, that I'd provoked it, that I needed to try harder, because that's what Tyler had convinced me of for years. But instead, she started naming things. This is gaslighting. This is emotional abuse. This is financial manipulation. Hearing those words, hearing someone with credentials say that what was happening to me had names and wasn't normal, was liberating in a way I can't describe. I wasn't crazy. I was being abused. and this wasn't my fault. The therapist explained the cycle of abuse to me, how it starts slowly with isolation and subtle criticism, how it escalates to financial control and destruction of self-esteem, how the abuser alternates between cruelty and affection to keep the victim confused and dependent. Each description was my life with Tyler, word for word. With therapy came painful insights about patterns I'd repeated. I realized I'd chosen Tyler exactly because he was broken, because I thought I could save him, because my self-worth was tied to being needed instead of being loved. Since the bullet at 13, I'd developed a need to prove my usefulness, to show that despite the chair I could do everything and more. Tyler had exploited that perfectly, putting me in the role of savior while he played victim, and when I finally had nothing more to give, he simply went to look elsewhere but kept me around, not to lose his support base. The therapist helped me see that leaving wasn't about him. It was about me choosing my own life for the first time in years, and that staying because of Liam wasn't protection. It was teaching my son that he should also accept crumbs when he grew up. Tyler noticed the change in me and got nervous. He tried to go back to being affectionate like in the first months, bringing cheap gifts, making empty promises about how things were going to get better. But now I saw through the performance. He even scheduled a couples therapy appointment, something I'd asked for hundreds of times and he always refused. But now that he was losing control, he finally agreed. We went to one session, and the couples therapist wasn't a fool. In 20 minutes, he saw exactly what was happening. When Tyler tried to throw blame on me, the therapist cut in and said, "What I'm seeing here isn't a couple with communication problems. What I'm seeing is an abusive relationship, and couples therapy isn't appropriate in this context." Tyler was furious, blamed me for having chosen a biased therapist, and refused to go back. But for me, that was one more confirmation of what I already knew. There was no possible fix. The final decision came in an unexpected way. Liam, my 7-year-old son, came into my room one night and asked, "Mom, why does Daddy Tyler make you cry?" I froze, didn't know he'd noticed, had made so much effort to hide from him what was happening. He continued, "I hear you crying in the bathroom when he leaves. I see you get sad when he's here. You were happier when it was just the two of us." Hearing that from my 7-year-old son was like taking an electric shock. I'd stayed because of him, and all along he was suffering too, seeing his mother being destroyed and learning that was normal. I picked him up, held him tight, and said the truth for the first time. "You're right, my love. Mommy hasn't been happy, but that's going to change, I promise. It's going to change." That night, after Liam fell asleep, I looked at myself in the mirror for the first time in months, really looked, and made a promise. Either I get out of this situation now, or I die here for real, and my son is left without a mother not because she was shot, but because she chose to stay. The second Tyler walked out the door that morning, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pure determination. I called my mom and said just, "Today's the day. I need your help." She didn't ask anything, simply said she'd be at my house in 20 minutes. While I waited, I started gathering documents. Liam's birth certificate, my medical records from the accident, proof of payment for all the courses I'd paid for Tyler, bank statements showing how I'd financed everything when he had nothing. Each paper I put in the folder was one more nail in that relationship's coffin. My mom arrived with my brother, and the two of them started helping me methodically, without drama, without questions, just action. It was as if the whole family had been waiting for this moment for years, just waiting for me to finally wake up and ask for help. We called a lawyer my mom knew from church. I explained the situation in general terms, and she said, "Come to my office now. Not tomorrow, not later, now." The consultation with the lawyer was revealing in ways I didn't expect. She looked at all the documentation, heard my story, and then said something that completely changed my perspective. "Rachel, you know the car is exclusively yours, right? It was a donation made specifically to you because of your disability. Tyler has no legal right to it whatsoever." That hit me like lightning. For years I'd let him use my car as if it were his, as if I should be grateful for him giving me a ride in my own vehicle. The lawyer continued, "And this house? You said it was built with a donation too?" I explained that after the accident, businessmen had made a specific donation to build an extension on my parents' house, where I could live with accessibility. Everything was in documents. Everything proved it was exclusively mine. The lawyer smiled and said, "So he has no right to anything, literally nothing. And if you want, You can ask for temporary alimony from him while you recover and get back into the job market, since you lost your job because of the stress he caused. The idea of Tyler having to pay me after years of being supported by me had a poetic justice I couldn't deny. We left the lawyer's office with a concrete plan. She would prepare the separation papers immediately, including a temporary restraining order in case he reacted badly, and guided me to do everything officially, through the legal system, without direct confrontations that could escalate to violence. She gave me the number of a domestic violence hotline I could call any time if I felt in danger. Looking at that card in my hand was surreal, because until that moment, I hadn't really accepted that what I'd lived through was domestic violence. It hadn't been physical most of the time, so in my head it didn't count. But the lawyer was clear. Emotional, psychological, and financial abuse is domestic violence. You were a victim for years, and now you're taking steps to free yourself. Those words, coming from a professional, validated years of pain I'd tried to minimize and ignore. I went back home before Tyler returned, put all the documents in a safe place that only my mom and I knew about, and waited, my heart beating fast but my mind surprisingly clear. Tyler got home at 7 p.m., smelling like her perfume as always, and found me sitting in the living room waiting. He immediately noticed something was different. The way I looked at him was no longer with that mix of hope and desperation. It was with something much more dangerous: indifference. Before he could say anything, I said, "We need to talk." He sat down, still trying to assess the situation, and I simply dropped, "I want you to leave. Today. Now." I saw shock pass through his face, then anger, and then that manipulative smile he always used when he thought he was going to control me again. He started with the usual litany. "Rachel, you're being dramatic. We can talk about this. You know I love you." But I cut him off in the middle and said something that even I was surprised by. "I don't care. I don't believe anything you say anymore. You have 1 hour to get your things and get out of my house." The word "my" was emphasized, because for the first time in years I was claiming what was mine. Tyler didn't expect real resistance. He expected me to give in as always. So when he realized this time was different, he changed tactics. He tried guilt. "And Liam? You're going to take his father away again?" I took a deep breath and said, "You were never his father. You were a man who lived here and was sometimes nice to him. But Liam deserves to see his mother strong, not destroyed, and that's what I'm going to give him." Tyler then tried intimidation, raised his voice, started walking around the living room in a threatening way and said, "This house is mine too. You can't kick me out." That's when I grabbed the phone and said calmly, "I have the police on speed dial. 1 word out of place from you and I press a button. You choose. You leave now peacefully, or you leave in handcuffs." He saw in my eyes I wasn't bluffing, and for the first time since I'd met him, Tyler was speechless. He went to the bedroom, threw clothes in a suitcase any which way, and when he passed by me on his way to the door, he tried one last card. "You're going to beg me to come back. You can't live without me." I looked at him, and for the first time in years, I smiled for real. Not a sad smile, not a bitter smile, but a smile of genuine relief. "Tyler," I said, "I survived a rifle bullet at 13 years old. Do you honestly think I won't survive you?" That left him speechless, and he left slamming the door. I heard the sound of his car driving away, that old car he'd bought with money I'd lent him and he never paid back, and when the sound of the engine disappeared in the distance, my legs gave out. I collapsed in the chair and started crying, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure relief. My mom appeared from the bedroom where she'd stayed during the whole confrontation, ready to intervene if necessary, and she simply hugged me while I cried. "It's over," I said. "It's finally over." She kissed my head and replied, "No, my daughter. Now it finally begins." The following days were harder than I expected, not because I missed him, but because removing someone from your life after years is like removing a tumor. You're relieved it's gone, but the hole it leaves hurts like hell. I woke up several times during the night expecting to hear his key in the door, and it took a few seconds to remember he wasn't coming back anymore. Liam asked where Daddy Tyler was, and I was honest in a way appropriate for his age. "He doesn't live here anymore, honey. Sometimes adults decide it's better not to live together, and that's okay." He thought for a moment and then said, "Okay, can I play video games now?" The ease with which he accepted showed me that deep down, my son also felt the weight of that toxic presence in the house, and was relieved to be able to breathe again. The house got lighter literally overnight, as if the walls themselves were sighing with relief. Tyler tried to come back 3 days later. He showed up at the door at 11 at night, crying, saying he'd broken up with Jessica, that he'd realized it was me he truly loved, that he was going to change, that he wanted a new chance. It was the most pathetic performance I'd ever seen, and part of me, that part conditioned by years of abuse, felt sorry. But then I remembered everything. The nights alone, the lies, the humiliation, my weight dropping to 85 pounds, the pastors holding vigil as if I were dying. I remembered my mom saying, "You're already dead, you just haven't been buried yet," and that memory killed any compassion that was arising. I looked at him through the door I kept closed and said, "Tyler, you had years of chances, hundreds of them. I gave you everything I had and you chose to throw it away. Now I'm choosing myself. Go away and don't come back." He tried to force the door, started yelling that he was going to break in, that I couldn't do that, and that's when I called the police right in front of him. When the officers arrived, he'd already left, but I filed a report anyway, creating an official record in case he escalated. The lawyer moved fast with the separation papers. Tyler was formally notified, and his response was exactly what she predicted. He wanted the car and part of the house. The lawyer laughed when she saw the request and said, "Leave it to me." At the preliminary hearing, she presented all the documentation proving that both the car and the house were specific donations to me, that Tyler hadn't contributed financially with anything, and that actually I had documented payment of over $12,000 in courses for him during the relationship. The judge looked at Tyler with a clear expression of disapproval and denied all his requests. But it didn't stop there. Granting my lawyer's request, the judge determined that Tyler pay temporary alimony to me for 6 months, while I recovered and looked for a new job. Seeing his face when the judge gave the decision was one of the most satisfying things I've ever lived through. He, who'd told me I was lucky he was with me, now would have to pay for having destroyed me. Poetic justice at its best. But the legal victory didn't mean everything was resolved emotionally. I started having nightmares about him, would wake up at 3 a.m. in panic thinking he was in the house. I developed severe anxiety whenever I heard a car stop in front of the house, my body going into automatic fight or flight mode. The therapist explained to me it was PTSD, that relationship abuse trauma is as real as war trauma, and that it would take time for my nervous system to understand the threat had passed. I continued in therapy religiously, twice a week at first, working not only on the Tyler trauma but also old patterns, the need to be a savior, the fear of being abandoned that came from my first relationship with Liam's father. It was painful work. There were sessions where I'd leave emotionally exhausted, but it was necessary work. There was no point in getting Tyler out of my house if I didn't get him out of my head too. Physically, I started recovering. With my mom's help, I went back to eating right, 3 meals a day, and gradually my body responded. I gained weight back. My hair stopped falling out. Color returned to my face. I started doing physical therapy again, something I'd completely abandoned during the years with Tyler, and rediscovered the pleasure of movement, of being connected with my body. There were bad days where I didn't want to get out of bed, where everything seemed impossible, but my mom didn't let me give up. She literally pulled me out of bed when necessary, put me in the chair and said, "Today you're going to get dressed. Today you're going to eat. Today you're going to live." And I did, one day at a time, sometimes 1 hour at a time, rebuilding my life piece by piece. After 3 months, I'd returned to my normal weight, 80 pounds more than when Tyler left, and each pound was a victory. Professionally, it took longer. My record as a social worker had been affected by the incident at work, and I needed to go through psychological evaluations to prove I was fit to return to the profession. It was humiliating to have to explain to strangers how I'd let my personal life affect my work, but it was also therapeutic in a way, because each time I told the story, it became less powerful, less shameful. The psychologist who evaluated me was kind, said what I'd gone through completely explained my professional breakdown, and that the fact I was seeking help and recovering showed exactly the kind of resilience necessary to work with vulnerable people. I received approval to go back to work, and after sending resumes to 20 different places, I finally got a position at a community center working with women in domestic violence situations. The irony wasn't lost on me. I, who'd been a victim, would now help other victims, but it made sense in a strange way, because I understood those women from the inside out. Seeing Tyler standing on that corner with a pregnant Jessica was like closing a cycle I didn't even know was still open. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel jealousy. I didn't feel that pang of, it could be me, that so many women feel when they see their ex moving on. All I felt was deep sadness for that woman who clearly had no idea what was coming, and an overwhelming gratitude that it wasn't me trapped in that web of lies anymore. Liam looked out the window and said, "Mom, that's Tyler." I confirmed calmly, without emotion in my voice, and he simply shrugged and went back to playing on his tablet. My son, now 8 years old, had learned the most important lesson I could teach. Some people leave our lives, and that's not tragedy. It's just change. I drove to school, left him with a kiss and an "I love you," and went to work feeling a lightness I hadn't felt in years. That Rachel, the one who begged for crumbs of affection, the one who apologized for existing, had been left behind for good. At work, I'd finally found my purpose again. Working with women in domestic violence situations was challenging in ways I didn't expect, because every story I heard echoed pieces of my own story. There were days I'd leave emotionally drained, carrying the weight of others' tragedies along with my own memories still in the healing process. But there were also days of pure victory, like when a woman who'd arrived destroyed, not believing she deserved to live, finally gathered the courage to leave, to report, to start over. Every time that happened, I saw a piece of myself being saved retroactively. I used my own story strategically, not with everyone, but with those women who were at that point of, "I can't leave. He needs me. It's my fault." I'd look in their eyes and say, "I know exactly what you're feeling because I was exactly where you are, and I'm here on the other side to tell you, it's possible. The way out exists." My relationship with my body also went through a profound transformation. For years with Tyler, I'd gone back to seeing my disability as a limitation, as the reason why I should accept less, as proof that I was lucky any man wanted me. But as I healed, I rediscovered that 13-year-old Rachel, who'd woken up in the hospital and told the doctor, "They tried to take everything from me, but they didn't take my head." I went back to adaptive sports, joined a wheelchair basketball team, and for the first time in years I felt connected with a community that saw me as complete, not as broken. I met other women wheelchair users who had healthy relationships, who were loved and respected, and that completely broke the narrative Tyler had planted in my head, that I should be grateful for any male attention. I wasn't less of a woman, less desirable, less worthy for being in a chair. I was simply me, complete and whole just as I was. My relationship with Liam transformed too, deepened in beautiful ways now that there was no longer that constant tension at home. We started doing simple things that had become impossible during the years with Tyler. Movie nights at home, just the two of us, going out for ice cream, bedtime conversations where he'd tell me about school and friends without fear of being interrupted by Tyler demanding attention. One day he asked me, with that innocent child curiosity, "Mom, are you going to get another boyfriend?" I thought carefully before responding, because I didn't want to pass on to him either disbelief in love or this idea that a woman needs a man to be complete. I told him, "Maybe one day, when someone appears who's nice to us, who respects us, and who adds to our life instead of taking away. But if that doesn't happen, that's okay too, because we're already a complete family." He processed that for a moment and then said, "Okay, but if you get another one, he has to like Mario Kart." I laughed, that genuine laugh that had been forgotten for so long, and promised that any future candidate would have to pass the Mario Kart test first. The healing wasn't linear. There were emotional relapses that caught me by surprise. There was a day, almost a year after Tyler left, when I saw a couple on the street, and the man gave the woman a kiss on the forehead before entering a store, and that triggered me in a violent way. I had a panic attack right there on the sidewalk, my heart racing, cold sweat, feeling like I was going to die. I called my therapist from a payphone nearby, shaking, and she guided me through breathing exercises until I could get back home. In the next session, we worked on that, disassociating the gesture from the trauma, reframing it. She explained to me that triggers like that were normal, that they'd become less frequent over time, but that trauma doesn't have an expiration date to heal. Some days would be difficult, and that didn't mean I'd regressed or failed. It just meant I was human. I learned to be gentle with myself on bad days, not to demand perfection in the recovery process, to accept that healing is 2 steps forward and sometimes 1 back, and that's okay. Financially, my life stabilized in ways that seemed almost miraculous. With the salary from the new job, plus the temporary alimony Tyler paid, always late, always complaining, but he paid because the judge had determined it, I managed not only to support myself, but also start saving money for the first time in years. I opened a savings account for Liam, small, about $50 a month, but it was the principle of thinking about the future again, of believing there was a future worth planning. I paid off all the debts I'd made during the years with Tyler, those family loans I'd never been able to pay off, and the feeling of finally being at zero, owing nothing to anyone, was liberating. My mom tried to refuse when I went to pay her, said money between mother and daughter wasn't a debt, but I insisted. It wasn't about the money, it was about proving to myself I was capable, that I could not only survive, but thrive on my own. Socially, I had to rebuild friendships that had worn out during the years of isolation Tyler had imposed. I called friends I hadn't seen in years. Some received me with open arms. Others were more cautious, hurt that I disappeared without explanation. I had to do the painful work of apologizing, of explaining without using the abuse as an excuse, but as context, of accepting that some bridges had been burned beyond repair. But I also made new friendships. At work, on the basketball team, at the church I went back to attending. People who only knew this new version of me, the strong and rebuilt Rachel, and who didn't carry memories of the destroyed Rachel I'd been. There was something liberating about being with people who didn't pity me, who didn't walk on eggshells afraid of breaking me, who simply saw me as a complete and functional person. Gradually, my social life stopped being a survival strategy and went back to being a source of joy. Spirituality, which had been so central in my life, and which I'd completely lost during the darkest years, came back in a different way. I didn't go back to having that naive and unconditional faith of adolescence, that belief that God would solve everything if I just prayed enough. My faith now was more mature, more complex, full of questions and doubts, but also deeper precisely because of that. I went back to church, not every Sunday like before, but when I felt I needed it, that I wanted that connection. I talked to the pastor about my doubts, about how to reconcile the idea of a loving God with the suffering I'd gone through, and he was wise enough not to give me ready answers. He just said, "Rachel, sometimes God doesn't deliver us from the valley of the shadow of death. He walks with us through it, and you walked, and you made it to the other side." That made more sense to me than any religious cliché about everything happening for a reason. Maybe there was no reason. Maybe it was just shit. But I'd survived, and that had to count for something. A year and a half after Tyler left, something happened that closed that chapter definitively. I received a message from Jessica on Facebook. My first instinct was to delete it without reading, but curiosity won. The message was short. "Rachel, you were right about everything. I should have listened to you that day at the cafe. Thank you for trying to warn me. I hope you're doing well." I stared at that message for long minutes, feeling a strange mix of sadness, anger, and something like compassion. I responded simply, "I hope you can get out. If you need help, let me know. I know how hard it is." She never responded, and I don't know if she left or stayed, but at least I'd done what I could. I'd offered the same hand that other women had offered to me, creating a support network that transcended egos and competitions. We weren't rivals, Jessica and I. We were victims of the same predator, and if I could help her escape faster than I escaped, it was my duty to try. Today, almost 2 years after kicking Tyler out, my life isn't perfect, but it's mine. I wake up in the morning in my house, which is only mine, without fear of walking on eggshells or saying the wrong thing. I make coffee and drink it in the silence of my kitchen, a silence that's peace and not loneliness. I take Liam to school and go to work, where I make a real difference in the lives of people who need it. I come back home at the end of the day and have dinner with my son. We watch TV together, do homework, simple routines that don't have drama or tension. There are days that are difficult, that loneliness weighs, that I miss having a partner not to complete me but to share life with. But on those days I remember where I was, what I accepted out of fear of being alone, and loneliness suddenly doesn't seem so scary. Better alone and whole than accompanied and destroyed. Always. If there's something I want other women to understand through my story, it's this. It doesn't matter how much time you invested, how much money you spent, how many excuses you gave, How many times you believed this time would be different. If you're in a relationship that diminishes you instead of strengthening you, that erases you instead of making you shine, you can leave. It won't be easy, it won't be quick, and it's going to hurt like hell. But on the other side of that pain, there's a life waiting for you, a life where you wake up without fear, where you smile for real, where you teach your children that love is respect and not suffering. I survived a rifle bullet at 13 years old, and that was horrible. Changed my life forever. But you know what was worse? The years I spent in an emotional wheelchair, paralyzed by fear and manipulation, unable to move toward freedom. The bullet took my legs, but Tyler almost took my soul. And if I could recover my soul, walk again emotionally, you can too. I look in the mirror today and see scars, physical and emotional. I see the bullet mark that will never go away. I see lines on my face that weren't there before the years of suffering. But I also see strength. I see survival. I see a woman who went through hell twice and came out alive. This woman in the mirror isn't perfect, doesn't have all the answers, is still learning to trust again, to open up again, to believe that good love exists. But she's free, free to choose, free to make mistakes, free to live. And that freedom, after years of emotional prison, is worth more than any relationship, any fear of loneliness, any social pressure to be with someone. If you're reading this and seeing yourself in my story, if you're recognizing patterns, if you're feeling that tightness in your chest that says, "This is about me," I tell you, the door is there. You just need to have the courage to turn the handle. And if I could do it, after everything I went through, believe me, you can too. Life is waiting for you on the other side. Go. Live. You deserve it.